another great talk coming up with Matt McInnis, who's going to be talking to us about ChatGPT for developers. And Matt is a full stack developer with Rails and React at Typist, based in Toronto, Canada. He's a former artificial intelligence lead at IBM and Microsoft, mathematics professor at Centennial College, and says, I can't say it. Saskatchewan Polytechnic. I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm really congested today, and it makes it even worse. Nothing I pronounce is coming out in the right way. So feel free to correct me, Matt, as you share all of the cool stuff with ChatGPT for developers.
Thanks a lot, Becca. I would have updated my LinkedIn profile if I knew we'd be diving in there today. But hi, everyone. My name is Matt McInnis. I'm just going to get my screen sharing here right now. I want to share my entire screen. Thank you very much. There we go. Let's get started. Let's have some fun. So today I'm going to be talking about ChatGPT for developers. Everything I'm going to talk about in here applies to what are large language models, or LLMs. And ChatGPT is an example of a really great, maybe the best one in the world, of a large language model. But why am I giving this talk in the first place? Well, first, as Becca mentioned, I love this stuff. I love machine learning and AI. I've worked in the field for quite a while. It was 7 years ago. I jumped in as a data scientist at IBM now. And further to that, there's been some recent gigantic leaps in AI that you've probably heard of, ChatGPT being the latest. And it seems like every week we're going further down the field with what this can do for us. And I've been using these tools extensively. I'm going to focus on ChatGPT today, but I believe more people should be using these tools. They've really have made me much more productive with everything I do, and especially development and writing code. And anyone can do it. It's really easy. I want you to go and try it out. That's my goal for the talk, is that you get excited, you jump in, you try some things out, and let's do it. So today, I'm going to do some basics about prompting. I'm going to give you lots of examples. So examples like crazy. We're going to be throwing everything into ChatGPT. So it's all going to be live. I'm going to end with some of my biggest tips and examples of what you can do, and everything I'm going to show you is open source. I put it on my Twitter and my GitHub. So here's my Twitter handle just down at the bottom. I'll put it in the chat though after. And just one last tip, don't try to understand everything. I'm going to be showing you lots of Ruby code. It's highly readable, but really try to focus on the input and output of the models. And of course, use the replay, because I'm going to go really quick. Let's dive in. So prompting basics. Let's look at a few just really simple examples and build up our sort of levels of prompting here. So I'm going to start with a really basic example, which is, how do I create a user, which is a class? So I want to create a new user instance from 2 hashes of attributes in Rails. And if you're not familiar with Ruby, a hash is the equivalent of an object in JavaScript or a dictionary in Python. But I've got 2 of them, and I want to instantiate this new class. So let's go ask ChatGPT to do this for us. So I'm using ChatGPT. It's free. I'm on the pro plan right now. But everything that I'm going to show you will work on the free plan just fine. So let's throw our prompt in. Great, we get a little explanation. So to create a new user instance from 2 hashes in Rails, you can merge 2 hashes, pass it into the thing. Below, we're getting a big explanation about how this stuff works. That's great. And this code will work out of the box. If I have a user class defined, this works perfectly. So that's pretty cool. Great starting point. Okay, let's try to take it a little bit further now. Okay, so I'm going to put in my context paragraph. This is a paragraph that I've been creating progressively over the last few months, and I often just copy paste and dump it into ChatGPT, which is what I'm going to do now. So I will show you this after my context paragraph. I've got a slide on it coming up next, but I'm going to do the same thing again. So let's do a new chat. I'm going to paste my context paragraph in, a big paragraph containing lots of information about me, about our code base, about apps or things that we use. We'll break it down in a moment. And I'm going to ask the same question. Go ahead and create a new user. Use these 2 hashes in Rails. Great. So you can create a new user from these 2 hashes by merging the hashes together like this. So you'll notice a few things. It's much shorter. The code example came faster. There's less of an explanation. Those are all things that I wanted and engineered with this prompt. That's great. And let's do one more. Let's follow up with a question here. We'll say, let's rewrite this example using Ruby 3. Okay, and I'm just going to copy paste that. We'll say rewrite this example using Ruby 3, and let's see what it gives us back. Sure, here's how you can rewrite the example using Ruby 3 with the numbered parameter feature. So just a different syntax here. So I really like this syntax where we're using a double splat operator to break out these hashes. versus using these like long merge things here. I just really like that bottom syntax. I'll also note that this was introduced in Ruby 2, as my awesome developer on my team, Andre, pointed out. So this isn't specific to Ruby 3, but the example here still stands, is you can go back and ask these models to go a little bit further. Rewrite this method using these tools or update it using these things. That's a really good method for prompting. So going back to our thing. So let's talk about that context paragraph I just gave it in order to get better output faster from ChatGPT. And that process, by the way, of trying to develop prompts that you can input as quickly as possible to get the most useful input back as possible is the challenge that's taken on by a field called prompt engineering. It's a really, really cool field. Highly recommend you dive in. I'm going to show you my favorite. I'm going to show you just one technique that's in prompt engineering, that's sort of beginner intermediate technique in this talk. I just want to highlight that that's really what we're doing here, is figuring out how to prompt it better. So this is my context paragraph. So I describe who I am, what I do, the company I work for, what the company does a little bit, where we're located. I say Typist is used in Ruby on Rails version 7. We have a Postgres database. We use mini-tests for testing, and we use a shoulda gem. I say when writing tests, use the shoulda gem wherever possible. We use devise for authentication. I say Matt is a highly proficient Ruby on Rails. At this point, I'm just bragging. No, I'm kidding. This is relevant in a moment. When answering questions, reply as Matt and give short, succinct answers with explanations unless otherwise asked. And in your response, do not repeat questions back. All the code you create should meet web accessibility standards. So this is my copy and paste blurb. If you're on a Mac, you can use that feature where if you just drag your mouse to the bottom right corner, you will get this little sort of pop-up for your notes. So you can just grab it and copy paste. There's also some good extensions that will put it in automatically for you. But just to describe why I'm giving it a prompt like this, so first I'm giving it context. So I'm saying, I'm Matt McInnis. I work for Typist. I'm in Toronto. I use Rails 7, so I give it context about who I am. This is really useful, for example, for writing emails or responding. Also, I'm going to show you an example later of how I use it to help me sort of generate a draft of a contract. And being location aware that I'm in Toronto, Canada, helps it use Canadian law when it's giving me that feedback and information. I tell it some information about my stack. That's also really useful when it's generating code. And I give it direction about voice. So I say, use Matt's voice. And I tell it Matt's a developer and he's a CEO. So that's helpful if I'm, for example, writing code or responding to emails. It also limits the explanations that come back by saying that I'm highly proficient in Rails. I say it to use its shoulda gem wherever possible in testing. I tell it to use accessibility. All of this gives like a direction to the output it's going to give me back. And then finally, this is a really important one, is control its verbosity, which is like how much it's giving you back when. So I say, be short, be succinct, don't repeat question back, limit explanations. All those help with that. So that's my little tidbit on prompting basics. So develop your context paragraph. It's really cool. And then you can just sort of preface all the prompts you're going to put in. So here's some of the biggest boosts I've received as a developer from ChatGPT. I'm going to show you some live examples now as we go through. So let's do it. I'm going to start with, this is one from 2 nights ago. All these are real examples. They're actual code that we're using in our code base now. Diagnosing unhelpful error messages. So this is brutal. 2 nights ago, I'm writing code. Or days ago, I'm writing code. And I'm writing a little class that you can see on the right-hand side of my screen. And it's a great little class called Family Initializer. I've stripped it down for the purposes here. But all the relevant code is still here. And I'm initializing, it accepts an object and a random name, and I just sort of initialize the class. And then it does a few things. So it adds a name, it just checks that the keys are still there. Cool. And then I go into the Rails console to kind of run my class, and I say, okay, family initializer.new, and I give it an empty family object, and I give it a random name, and then I get this error. And this is the worst kind of error because it's not helpful at all. It says error in the initialize method, wrong number of arguments, and I gave it 1 and I expected 0, and I'm massively confused because I actually gave it 2 arguments, I thought, and it should be expecting 2 arguments. And it's not an understatement to say that, 20 minutes later, I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm just hitting my head off the desk. I'm trying to put debugger statements in. I'm trying to log output. I can't really get anywhere with it. I'm stuck. And also, it's worth noting that search, like Google, won't help me with this. I don't really have anything tangible that I can search here. I'm not even getting a line number where the error is. The error that I'm getting back is just pointing to the terminal line number up here. So I'm totally stuck. And so what do? Well, I'm going to jump into my new favorite dev tool, ChatGPT, and throw this in and just be like, hey, help me out a little bit here. So ChatGPT, let's make a new chat. And I'm going to simply give it, hey, help me fix this. Help, I am stuck. What's wrong with this? With this. And I'm going to put this code in. I'm going to use Markdown syntax, and the only reason I'm really doing that is that ChatGPT tends to give back Markdown syntax, but I haven't found any boosts in inputting with Markdown yet. And so right away, it looks like there's a couple issues here, and the most frustrating error in history, the initialize method is misspelled. Great. I can't spell, and I spent all that time thinking I wrote some sophisticated code error in one of these loops I'm doing. Nope, I spelled initialize wrong. And so if I really envy you if you've never had a mistake like this when you're programming. It seems to happen to me a lot. But I go back and yep, initialize is spelled wrong. I fixed that in a way when ChatGPT solved this error that search and I could not get could not find help anywhere for. So I really like that example because it contrasts like these new things that we can do, right? All these tools that we have for linting, and it just didn't catch it, but ChatGPT did in just milliseconds. Really cool. Another great use case is for crawling documentation of open source repositories. I am using ChatGPT much more for basic documentation questions than I am going into like API doc or the React docs or any of these other repositories. So let me show you an example. I'm going to be copying and pasting from VS Code a little bit here. So I'm going to jump in. And so in this example, what I was trying to do is I was trying to override the persisted method in a Ruby on Rails model. And I just had no idea really how to do that, but I needed to know how this persisted method was implemented. So I first tried the usual way, like the pre-ChatGPT way. I tried to go into the open source repository, navigate to where this persisted method is defined, and try to find the code. It was really hard to find the source code. And so I jumped in to ChatGPT, and sure enough, boom, here's the source code for persisted. And I could even ask a follow-up question to say, where is this defined? And I could ask it to give me a link. So crawling documentation and trying to find source code, really big boosts if you use, in my opinion, with ChatGPT. So let's look at some more advanced examples. So transforming code. Stay with me a little bit on this one. This is the biggest chunk of code that I'm going to show you here. So this is a Ruby script. And again, all these are real examples. So this is an example from a few days ago. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look up all of the daycares in Barrie, Ontario. This is, not for personal use. This is actually part of the repo that we're doing. I just changed the type of thing that we're looking for. And to do that with the Google Maps API, I need to make sort of 3 requests. I need to request the long lat of Barrie first, and then down here, I get the location, and then down here, I go and I query for all the daycares, and then for each of those daycares, I kind of have to go and get information about each place. And this is a script. This is basically copy-paste from the Google Maps documentation. So now that I've got it to a place in the console where this is all working, I probably want to make it a little bit more object-oriented and put it into my code base. So I want to make a class. So I'm just going to go and grab all this code, all this Ruby code, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to take this Ruby script and format it into a class. If I was doing this sort of, for reals, I would probably put my context paragraph in as well, but we don't really need it here. So I'm just going to dump it all in, and here's the result formatted as a class. You see it made a class called Daycare Finder. It's initializing with my API key, city radius type, and it's got a method in here that's called find daycares. And it goes in and it grabs all my code, my long lat, and then it's going to output a bunch of results onto the page. And this code, I'm not going to run it right now for time considerations, but this works out of the box, works perfectly. So let's look at the next example. We're going to build on this a little bit. Okay, so we saw how we can transform code easily. That works really, 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 really well. It also works with refactoring. Let's get it to write some documentation. So this is one of my favorite examples. And I'm going to motivate this with this is the only example of a sort of intermediate advanced prompting technique. It's called generated knowledge prompting. It's really cool. So instead of jumping in and just saying, hey, write documentation for this class, I'm going to do, because it's going to do only a mediocre job at that, and I'll ask you to take my word for it. Instead, I'm going to ask it to describe what the best practices are for in Ruby for writing a class and writing Ruby class documentation. And it's going to give me a really good list of best practices. It's going to say keep the methods small and make them understandable and use documentation techniques like Yard, etc. Great. And then the next prompt I'm going to do, so I've asked it to generate knowledge now, and that's what it did. It generated a lot of knowledge you can see on my screen. And as a follow-up prompt, I'm going to say, hey, just use this information and rewrite the class you created. Like, do better, ChatGPT. And it does. It does a great job. So it's writing documentation in here. It's following some conventions. It's giving examples in the comments. It's also, in some cases, it'll refactor too. So let's see if it does here. Yep. So now we have private methods. And so it's broken out the geocoding city into its own method. It's just really powerful for doing these things. So if you're like me and when you're writing code, you tend to just have like a quick one-line comment, using ChatGPT to expand that out into like RDoc or Yard so that you can see across Visual Studio, the documentation can be really, really helpful. I'm going to do one last example just for time considerations, and I want to show you the data manipulation example. This is really cool. So building off what we just did, let's look at some data manipulation. So here's the actual output of the response from that Google Maps API. So if you look at it, the data, it's really tough. So each one of these arrays here, I know it's small on your screen, let me make it larger. Each one of these arrays is one business. So imagine you're at Google Maps and you clicked on a particular business. And you'll see it's an array of objects that have a property called long name, which really is just a bunch of text. And then they have this type property that's an array. And this type property tells us that this is a street number, a route, or this array has two elements, that it's locality or political, administrative area too. But really what I'd really like is, pretend I have just like 10 of these results and I just need a YAML file for these 10 results. That's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to say this represents output from the Google Maps API, and I'm going to ask it to reformat all these objects in YAML. And that's going to be my ask of ChatGPT here. And let's do it. So I'm going to say, reformat these in YAML. And now by giving that context, remember we talked about the types of elements in that prompt. So I give it the context of this is output from Google Maps API. It is aware of the documentation of that API. So when it goes and reformats this YAML file, let's see how it does. Yeah, and it does just basically a perfect job. It spits it out, it's perfect, and it's remorted. I've changed the property names, but it's able to follow it perfectly, and spits out a perfect YAML file that I could copy paste and go off to the races with. It's really, really cool. And just some other, creating forms, writing tests is a huge boost. Doing spreadsheet functions that are complex, learning about a given topic is really powerful with ChatGPT. You can give it a prompt, I'll just show it to you. Where you can say, you are the world's greatest teacher. You explain concepts with examples. You use the Socratic method of teaching. And then ask it a question like, how does authentication work on a website? And I find that in some cases, this is a much easier, more natural way to learn than trying to go and find and read a big blog post. Okay? So just getting near the end here, here's my biggest tips. So create the context paragraph. I want to also stress these 2 points, which is be mindful what you're sending to OpenAI or any third party. So if you work for a big company, be very careful putting any work data into this API without proper consideration and approvals first. So you may not want to throw company information or code into any third-party service, even if it's going to help you write code better. Next, watch for hallucinations. So anything that it spits out that is important information to you, make sure you validate it, because a hallucination in these large language models, it just makes stuff up. That's what it is. Next, make use of generated knowledge prompting like we saw. This is important, is these models know nothing in their current state as of March 31st, 2023. They don't know anything after September 2021. That was when their data set was cut off. You can control how chatty it is. Okay, so in your prompt, you can say, don't give explanations. Don't worry about spelling, sentence structure, just get it all out. And use Markdown, and then this is my last tip, is think bigger. Try to do even more. Try to push it to do even more. And I want to end this with one final thing. I know I'm a little bit over. I'm sorry, Becca and Dan. But you can access these ChatGPT programmatically through an API. And what that lets you do is it lets you build really cool apps extremely easily by basically doing exactly what we did. So let me show you one I made for a friend. This is a fun little few-hour project I made for a friend that uses ChatGPT under the hood. I call it the chiropractor blog post writer. And I'm going to take a little prompt here and copy and paste it in. And this is a friend, he's a chiropractor. He has to write blog posts for his business. And he works collaboratively with some others. But they have to be kind of long, technically written blog posts, and they take a long time. So I wrote an app where he can take a single sentence describing like, hey, somebody came in and they had a sprain in the right trap. They didn't have any pain, and we're not giving any information about the treatment. We just said the patient was advised to see a chiropractor. And then what I've done is I've combined that input with a context paragraph about who my friend Brock is and what he's an expert in and the type of philosophies on his training. And it spits out a perfect blog post. And the cool thing here that I'm going to highlight is it uses technical language. It talks about abduction, external rotation. It even suggests treatment paths, and then he can just crop this down and edit it. So you can go and use these APIs to make really cool things. And that's the end of my talk. Once again, all of my code, all the code and all the prompts I showed you, including my context paragraph, and one example that is amazing, but we would never have time for, is on my GitHub, which you can access easily through my Twitter. And that's it. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the talks.
Thanks so much, Matt. And I posted Matt's Twitter and his GitHub and his LinkedIn at the beginning of the talk, so you can check it all there in the chat. I love ChatGPT. I use it all the time, every day. I just tweeted about it this morning. I say every morning I go to the gym and I lift heavy weights and I teach people about ChatGPT, and that is not a lie because it is very much a part of my day. So I appreciate being able to dive into this a little bit more and learn more about that. So if you have questions, hit Matt up on Twitter. You can post them in the chat. Some of the questions I pulled in and sent it to Matt in his DMs in case he has some response that he wants to share with you. And we're very happy to have Matt here and to talk about that.